Hello, welcome. In previous videos I talked about testing in the UK and how to interpret the number of cases, the difficulties in doing that. I also talked about observable trends in the healthcare data, the number of patients being admitted to hospital. And so today I'm going to talk about the number of daily deaths, the things that you should be wary of when looking at these numbers, especially around about weekend reporting. So there's two sections on the UK dashboard. The first one reports it by date of death. So first point of note is when you're looking at very recent figures, if you look at the data, you have to bear in mind that these will be changing with each update that comes through day by day because it takes a while for deaths to be registered. So you can analyse further back in time quite well, but be really careful about the recent days. And the second section relates to what you'll probably hear on a daily basis from the news. And this is the number of reported deaths on a daily basis. And this will be reporting deaths for a number of previous days. So a quick glance at the data. Something that's really important to note, and this has been known since early April or even the end of March, is that this data is reporting the deaths in a 24-hour period up to 5 p.m. the previous day. So this data was released on Tuesday, which was yesterday, and it was reporting deaths reported up to 5 p.m. on the Monday. So this was a genuine figure, albeit catching up from the weekend. Now this figure basically is the deaths that were reported on Sunday, and this figure was deaths that were reported on Saturday. So just bear in mind, any figures you hear on a Sunday and on a Monday will always be a lot lower. So that's probably all I'm going to say about that. What I'm going to work with in this example is I'm going to go to the NHS England website. So I'm going to have a look at the hospital deaths for COVID. This is in some ways a more trustworthy source than looking at the other stuff, which includes care homes, deaths in the community, which may or may not be confirmed as COVID. So I'm going to start by opening the data that NHS England publish, not to be confused with Public Health England. That's a different organisation. So once in Excel we'll get to see the daily deaths. Now just going to enable editing so I can copy and paste this data. So first thing to look at is we can see historically that we've got the peak that we saw in April time. The actual peak was April the 8th. And it's obviously dropped off a lot. This is what is effectively an exponential decay. You'll have heard of exponential growth. Exponential decay is the same principle, but when you're decreasing an amount by a fixed percentage each day. I'll be able to show that in the data, and I'll also be able to show how things have been changing in time since July onwards. There's a definite trend, and that coincides with what we saw in the hospital data previously. So first things first, let's take a copy of the data. So I'm going to start with the 1st of March and I'm going to take it right the way up to the 21st of September. Just going to quickly paste that into a completely new spreadsheet. So bear with, I'll open Excel and I'll just pivot that data when I paste it. And the other thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to sort it reverse chronological, so the recent data at the top. Now what's really worth understanding is that these 5 figures, the 5 previous days, will change significantly over time and just simply can't be trusted at this point. So I'm just going to blank those out for now. That's going to make the analysis somewhat easier. And similarly, when we were in March time, and you're talking about 1 or 2 deaths a day and then it drops to 0, that's also going to cause some very misleading results. So I'm also going to exclude those from the analysis, and then we're going to see a clean distribution for this data. So as with every other video, I will be putting a 7-day rolling average over the top of the data. So that's my 7 cells, 3 days before, 3 days afterwards, and the day in question. So just reduce down the number of decimal places. Now we could do a quick chart of that actually. I'm going to need column headings, which is the date, the actual number of deaths, 7-day average. So now we've got the 7-day average, it's worth doing a quick visualization of this data. I'll go back to the start of July as I did in my previous video, and I'm simply going to insert a hybrid chart. So putting that into a new sheet where it's easier to see on a small screen, what we can see is that during early July the number of daily deaths was definitely decreasing, And then when we come to the end of August, 31st of August, we hit the turning point and that started to rise. So as with the previous videos, I'm going to start looking at the growth rates, daily growth rate this is, and the average daily growth rate. So the growth rate on a daily basis is the value for one day divided by the value for the previous day, subtract 1, that will give you a percentage. We can copy and paste that same formula to all the other rows, and we also want a 7-day average over top of that. So that's the 7 rows we're interested in, and again we're going to paste that formula to all the other lines. So now we have this data. I'm going to do a quick plot which is all of the historical data. So I'm going to put it into another sheet, and I'm going to just increase the size of it for the small screens. The axis is on top of the data, so I'm just going to move that down to the bottom. I'm going to also format the percentage to show it as a percentage. Don't need any decimal places there. And lastly, we will add some additional grid lines. So we want the primary minor grid lines. So they're subtle, they're in light grey, but they're good enough for me to now be working with. So I'm going to paste this into Paint. So this is the daily growth rate over time. So it was falling from late March through to April. After a while, the effects of lockdown became relatively stable. So what we have at this point in time is, if I was to just do this visually for now, again I've done a previous video where I say you could do this mathematically. Effectively I've done some of that activity before and found that the average for this period of time is about minus 3.9%, so I've just plotted a green line there to show where it's effectively flat. It undulates, and you could see that if that was to continue for all eternity it would be averaging about minus 3% per day, minus 3.9% per day. Now what's clearly been happening in recent days is that the growth rate has been increasing, and that's possible cause for concern. So there's 2 sections that I can see here. Oops, so that's the green section. And from this point in time, if you were to look at it mathematically, what you would find is that it's actually increasing, and it gets itself up to this axis here. I'll just draw the axis itself in black so that it's clear what's happening. And this growth rate of 0 would mean that it's the same day after day, whereas a negative growth rate means it's decreasing down day by a fixed percentage, and where it's positive it's increasing down day. So we've got the point which was around about the end of August where it actually hits the axis and it crossed the 0, and over all of the days since then, it's about a fortnight's worth of data we can work with, we can now see that it's positive. And at points in time it's been as high as 8% here, which I will also highlight. So there was an 8% over here. Currently, as of yesterday, it's about 5%, but this appears to be tracking the growth rates for the hospitalisations. It just seems to be lagging behind by 10 days or so. So what I mentioned in the hospitalisation video is that hospitalisations give you a view on people being infected a couple of weeks earlier who then became sufficiently ill to end up in hospital. Daily deaths is showing you the people who became ill, were infected about 3 weeks prior, subsequently became ill, ended up in hospital, maybe. In this case they certainly have, and then they've gone on to die. So what can we see? Well, there's a few key dates here. So where did we stop seeing this flat line? Well, on this axis here, it was around about 26th of July, a few weeks after the lockdown measures eased up somewhat. We could start going out to pubs, restaurants, visit our friends, go back to the office. And also there's another point in time which was quite significant, which is this point in time over here, which was the end of August sometime, give or take a few days, and that's when we started seeing an actual positive growth rate. Now if we just quickly flick back to the spreadsheet and look at the numbers in question, and look where the average switched from negative to positive. So there was this point in time where for the most part the numbers were negative, we were in daily decline, and then there's this point onwards, 31st of August, which is where the numbers actually started increasing with each day. So the turning point was the 31st of August. But when you look at the averages and you calculate them back in time, you can say that it was actually late July where we saw a change from the constant minus 3.9% on a daily basis, and slowly that crept up to 0, and then that turned into daily rising cases. So that's what's evident in the data. So if you do see anyone say number of cases rising hasn't led to any increase in hospitalisations, any increase in deaths, that's absolutely incorrect. It's here to see in the data. The only thing is that the numbers are still quite small, so they're not so easy to spot when you compare them to the peak that we saw back in April, but they are nevertheless growing. And they're currently growing at about 5%, 8%, and this corresponds to kind of 10 to 12 day doubling time in the number of daily deaths. And those numbers, as you will have seen from our previous video that explains how numbers doubling over a period of time become very big very quickly. So when we saw yesterday the number of possible cases and number of deaths leading to a couple of hundred people dying by the end of October, that's actually quite a conservative view on the numbers that you can see in the data here. Whether you choose to believe it or not is your call, but it's here in the data. So that's all from me. If you like the video, please press like. If you want to see more, then please subscribe. Hopefully see you again sometime. Bye.